Welcome to Mrigashira, a podcast that communicates with communicators. This podcast is a tribute to our fantastic fellow professionals, colleagues, and friends. I'm Charu Raizada, and this podcast is brought to you in association with Digitales. In any startup, good communications both internally and externally is considered the most vital element for success. Companies that focus on communicating well typically find that their work proceeds more efficiently and with less stress and friction. Today's guest is Madhura Moulik, co-founder and director Skilfinity. Madhura enables startups and SMEs of any size or industry to drive sustainable change and impact through digital transformation. Stay with me on Mrigashira.
Hi Madhura, pleasure having you on Mrigashira, a podcast for communicators. You have been closely working with startups to drive sustainable change and impact through digital transformation. There is this huge paradigm shift challenging the overall functionality of startups. So how challenging has it been to get startups to communicate their brand story and in the right way?
There isn't enough education in the market. And the entire approach, personally, for me, has been very educative. Talking to people and making them understand what would work for them, how should they actually approach talking about a brand story, what are the imperatives of a brand story. So it's more like coaching them, similar to how you would in a media field talk about a person's talking points when they are speaking with a media personnel. Just talk to the brand founder or the company founder and creator about what should their story be and how they should actually talk about it. Allow me to just dig a little deeper into the entire thing. The overarching narrative is kind of consistent, but it usually is tailored for the audiences that they are speaking to. So by definition, brand story is something very simple, a digestible narrative that explains why the company came into existence in the first place. And the flexible part of the brand story is what is the reason that still serves the purpose in today's day and age. So when we say all of this in a storytelling format, it kind of captures people's attention. It bakes the information in their memory. It kind of forges a close personal bond. The emotional payoff is crucial. So basically what I'm trying to say is the initial part or the simple narrative that is there will be consistent throughout, but depending on what or who is your audience, you are going to change the latter part of it and talk about the purpose or the reason for that particular brand with their context. You got to just know your audience, build the customer profile basis their geography, their demography, digital consumption, or how they are actually solving the problem that you are trying to address through your solution or your product right now, etc. etc. Just know your audience and craft your brand story for each of these audiences. Typical way I would say is 5 W's and 1 H, but let me kind of tailor it with an example that I have of a client of ours. One of our clients in Singapore is a fintech organization who did a product launch in the thick of COVID. Now, fintech was one of the industries which really found its footing and was heavily glorified during COVID. Everyone wants to be financially inclusive. Everyone needed the cash flow to be there. So going digital was paramount for most businesses and individuals as well with the lockdown in place. When they were doing the product launch, which was the overarching narrative of the company was any which ways about financial inclusivity and enablement. But the current product was more towards businesses and how they can save a lot for being an SME and how they can advance in their digital transformation journey. So the entire brand story was kind of tailored for the various audiences. During the product launch, the CEO actually boosted the morale of everybody in the organization. They did the launch within 90 days. So it was very celebratory narrative. The company's team was congratulated about their efficiency and dedication. Then for the investors, the narrative, the overarching was same, but they spoke more with data to ensure that it's more factual projection in terms of what is the market potential, what is the growth, what are the investors looking at for them to be still in the game with this particular brand. For partners, they spoke mostly about the part that they tailored was how they can benefit from the brand which is already existing in the market and what is in it for them basically. And finally, the most important, customers. For customers in a fintech background, honestly, the customer needs to have a lot of faith and trust in the brand. You are dealing with someone's money, so it's building that trust is very, very important. So talking with reference points or pilot case studies or what has been the brand journey so far, who are the good partners that they work with, some really strong brand names, quoting some really strong brand names, showing a bit of media presence and trustworthy elements in the entire story, in the entire narrative kind of worked in their favor. So basically create trust and validation, relatable, successful stories, establish your subject matter expertise for the partners, make it aspirational and motivating for the employees, and be factual for your investors.
It's very interesting you talk about faith and trust, and holds true for most sectors, right? And in the last 1.5 years, we've seen when it comes to the healthcare sector specifically, we've just gone blindly completely on faith and trust. So,
Yes.
The sudden explosion of digital to accelerate and scale up communication has been a game changer in more than one ways, right? So we've seen it in healthcare and the quality of healthcare delivery, moving beyond the initial phase of piloting and experimentation and all of that. And I'm sure this holds true for most sectors. What would be your communication plan for a startup using digital first approach?
For any digital journey, there are two aspects. You can go organic, or you can spend some money and sponsor and go for that higher reach, the grander outreach that you would do. But most startups usually do not have very deep pockets, so they would want to keep their spending minimal, or tailor towards as organic as possible. Now the caveat for the entire thing is organic is actually a long-term game. You will not see overnight success stories by doing a lot of organic outreach. Having said that, you can always kind of look at a media mix which would be helpful for both, which is the combination of organic plus paid. So let me actually start with a few numbers first. If you look at the global mobile users, they have reached 5.27 billion. Almost 67% of the world's total population are mobile users at this point of time. This is July 2021 data. There are more than 4.5 billion social media users around the world, which is almost equivalent to 57% of the world population. It has been growing steadily during COVID, almost at 13% rate. So obviously everybody was locked down in their homes, but it did not deter them to getting a lot of screen time. And of course, just for the context sake, 1 in every 9 users today has come onto social media or started using any of the social media platforms in the past 12 months. So that's like a lot of newer folks who are getting introduced to the world of social media. So you have that many people who can be groomed or who can be introduced to your products. The playing field is simply vast. I mean, not easy to kind of cover for startups, and that's why they have to kind of segment themselves and understand where they actually fit. Google search handles more than 90% of the search queries. So obviously you cannot just eliminate search. By search, I mean search engine platforms. So there are, just taking a step back, there are two aspects. One is search and one is social. Search is like Google, Bing, Yahoo, Yandex, Baidu's of the world. Social media is Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok of the world. So when you're creating your media mix, you got to look at a healthy mix between these two. Now, if you have to go the organic way, just got to understand two things from marketing perspective. There's no such thing as $0 marketing or free marketing. You have to account it through at least a personal time of the person. So you may not convert it into proper dollar value that you are spending on a paid advertisement, but it is still someone's time which you are paying for probably. And not essentially all branding activities are measurable for that matter. Some of them have attributions which would come in probably after a year or so. Some of them would come immediately. So not essentially you are going to be able to measure. A lot of branding activities actually develop word of mouth, and there's no good way to measure word of mouth unless you are running a proper affiliate program and all of that, which is again is kind of complex for any startup. So because marketing is a long game, some of the digital outreach that contribute towards keeping you in the long game are organic in nature. And when I say organic, there are primarily three aspects. You optimize for the search engines, you use the right keywords, you essentially ensure that whenever your clients are searching for you with the keywords that they usually go in for or search for the product, you are there in front. So you are optimizing for the search engines like Google and the Yahoos of the world. You definitely create a social media presence. I mean, you just cannot ignore social media, and there is never a time where you would say that I'm going to start it later. There's later is not good enough. You got to probably do everything yesterday rather than tomorrow. That's how the world has come to. But anyhow, you build a presence through social media, and more often than not, for a fresh organization, the brand is not as strong for search. So when you are searching, for example, any of your brands, if you do not, more often than not, your brand is going to come like a LinkedIn link or a Facebook link before in a search result page, rather than actually your brand website. So you cannot ignore social media. Okay. The other activities which you usually do, which you keep building as a cadence and more like a checkbox and are long term, which would build in a lot of credibility over the period of time, have top of mind recalls like newsletters. These are low impact, but still ensures that you are having a communication channel with your target customer group. You probably are part of WhatsApp group. You channelize, you network with your immediate family, friends, and user group, and see how you can fit in their digital landscape. You leverage partners, you build a community, champion some of the products. I'll give you an example of another client of ours who are in the IT services space, and they are pretty new here in the region. But they have, over the period of time, past 3 years, they have very strongly worked on two aspects. One is to build a community where they are investing to upskill the entire workforce. They're in IT services, so there is always a demand to have more and more folks join their organization as they are growing, as well as to ensure that people understand technology and are using technology how it is supposed to be. So they run a lot of live workshops. They groom the university students on how to face interviews, how the academic world is different than the working environment in a technology firm, what is the best way to code, all of those programs. And the other program that they run is to ensure that they are putting their team out there, so that the team kind of feels all the time that they are highly valued. They proudly call themselves as employee first organization. So they show off their talent without any inhibitions, talk about what has been working well for them, what each of these individuals' journey has been, how they have transformed from probably the time that they joined the organization to a certain amount of time where they have upskilled themselves and achieved their personal growth. They really focus on a lot of self-growth and upskilling. So these are the two pillars that they try to drive and bring in through social media, and everything is organic. They do not spend on paid channels or paid media at all, and it's really worked very well for them.
So, one question which clients typically ask, and I'm sure they asked you too, and while you've talked at length about paid versus organic, but I'm going to ask you that question in, the way a client would, that what do you recommend, organic versus a paid strategy?
The answer is it depends. What is your goal? If you are in the long game, then you cannot ignore organic. You will have to build for optimization. But if it is a short-term thing, then you would probably, again, I'm not a personal advocate of this, but you do keep spending a bit of money, doing a lot of experiments to see what is actually sticking with your audience or sticking in the current digital landscape. So it has to be a healthy mix of both. It depends on the customer appetite as well and how much they have as a runway to play with.
You made the point, it depends on your goals, because that's really what it is. And I really wanted you, being an expert, to talk about that. So thank you for reiterating that. I know you've talked a lot about social. You've talked about social in the first 90 days plan for a startup. But, typically one finds there's a lot of reticence around social media with new businesses especially, right? So what is your take on that?
Well, social media is something which you cannot ignore anymore. But you've got to probably find a way how to be a little responsible socially, not essentially socially, but probably look at how sustainable your entire business is and contributing towards the ESG, the jargon which translates into environmental, social, and corporate governance, with environmental and social being the primary focus over here. It is, in fact, driving these days a lot of investors with a change of consumer taste and change in how the shareholders are actually demanding action. The organizations are almost compelled to the extent that they are adapting to environmental and social responsibilities.
Thank you so much, Madhura, for sharing those wonderful insights with us. Thanks a lot.
Most welcome, Charu. It was truly a pleasure.
Hope you enjoy listening to Mrigashira, a podcast for communication folks. Do share your suggestions and feedback on Mrigashira at digitales.co.in. Have a great week ahead and do not forget to tune in next week. Adios.